The air inside the hearing room was so still it felt like it might shatter. Every camera light glowed red. Every journalist leaned forward, and the faint rustle of paper stopped as Pam Bondi rose from her seat. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate, measured, almost theatrical. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, every strand of hair perfectly in place, Bondi radiated the confidence of someone who believed the moment belonged to her. Across the long mahogany table sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, framed in the deep red of her blazer, vivid contrast against Bondi's polished blue. Where Bondi's posture was rigid and performative, Crockett's was poised, still a quiet storm waiting its turn. The two women locked eyes for a heartbeat that seemed to stretch forever. The chairman's gavel echoed once. Cameras adjusted focus. Then Bondi leaned into the microphone. "Congresswoman Crockett has been spreading false information for months," she declared. The words cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Murmurs rippled across the chamber as aides whispered and reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. C-SPAN's broadcast ticker flashed live captions. Freezing on the accusation, Bondi straightened a folder marked "Confidential." The gesture slow and deliberate, designed to draw the eye. "And today," she continued, her tone sharpening to a blade, "I'm presenting proof that will expose the truth." Gasps scattered through the room. On one side, Republican members leaned forward, hungry for spectacle. On the other, Democrats shifted uncomfortably, bracing for the blow. Crockett didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady, expression unreadable. Only her fingers, resting lightly on a notepad, moved as she wrote something small, precise, and deliberate. Bondi smiled faintly, sensing the moment belonged to her. The cameras captured her from every angle. Florida's former attorney general, a symbol of control and confidence. Yet the air carried a tension she couldn't feel. Somewhere beneath the murmur of reporters and the clicking of camera shutters, an unseen current was shifting. As Bondi reached for her folder, preparing to unveil what she called her evidence, the sound of the gavel returned, urging silence once more. The room obeyed. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. But what Congresswoman Crockett did next would silence the entire chamber and shock the nation. Before the cameras ever flickered on, before the microphones hummed to life, the outcome seemed certain. Pam Bondi had walked these halls before Florida's first female attorney general, a practiced defender of conservative ideals, a trusted voice in Trump's inner circle. She was a familiar face to Fox News viewers, known for her polished confidence and the unwavering rhythm of her sound bites. To her allies, she was the embodiment of control, articulate, combative, impossible to shake. To her critics, she was something else entirely, a weapon shaped by power and ambition, always aimed at whoever dared challenge her narrative. This hearing wasn't supposed to be about Jasmine Crockett. The agenda read emergency response funding, a policy discussion that rarely drew headlines. But politics in Washington is never about what it seems. When Republican members invited Bondi to testify as a special witness, Democrats objected immediately. Bondi had no expertise in disaster relief, but she didn't need it. Her expertise was performance. This committee, room lined with cameras and reporters, was the perfect stage. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, the freshman Democrat from Texas, whose presence radiated both poise and fire. Barely a year into her first term, Crockett had already gained a reputation for sharp questioning and unflinching truth-telling. A former civil rights attorney from the University of Houston, she had built her career on defending the voiceless and challenging the comfortable. Her accent carried the cadence of the South, her words the weight of the law. To supporters, she was the future bold, unapologetic, unwilling to bend. To her detractors, she was a threat cloaked in calm. They were perfect opposites. Bondi, the enforcer of the old guard, draped in establishment armor; Crockett, the insurgent lawyer, precise and fearless. One stood for the idea that control must never be questioned. The other, that truth must never be silenced. The tension between them was more than political, it was generational, cultural, moral. Bondi represented the America that insisted it was losing something. Crockett represented the America still fighting to be heard. Every exchange, every glare, every click of a camera was another spark in a room soaked with gasoline. Outside the chamber, the nation waited. The midterms loomed like a gathering storm. Every statement, every misstep could be spun into a viral clip or campaign ad. Influencers stood ready to amplify outrage, networks ready to weaponize words. In that climate, perception wasn't just power, it was survival. For weeks, whispers had circulated that Bondi was preparing something big, something personal. She had told donors she was exposing corruption, that she had receipts. In conservative media circles, her reappearance in Washington was treated like a comeback tour. The expectation wasn't just testimony, it was spectacle. Crockett, meanwhile, knew the game. Her team had warned her of possible attacks, coordinated smears, planted stories, but she refused to shrink from confrontation. If they want to fight, she had told her staff. They'll get one, but it'll be on my terms. As the hearing began, the divide was almost tangible. Republican aides huddled with nervous excitement. Democratic staffers whispered strategy. Every seat in the room was filled. Every journalist's pen was poised. Bondi adjusted her microphone, scanning the room like a trial attorney about to deliver closing arguments to her. This was more than testimony. It was an opportunity to remind the world that she could still dominate the stage. To Crockett, it was just another day in the arena, another test of composure. The gavel struck once, and silence rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in, and when the chairman gave Bondi the floor, not even her allies knew the disaster she was about to unleash. Pam. Bondi's voice cut through the air like a polished blade, honed by years of courtroom performance and televised confrontation. "Mr. Chairman, members of the committee," she began, standing tall behind the witness table. "I've come here today because the American people deserve to know when they've been misled by those they elected to serve." Her tone was steady, righteous, and just sharp enough to draw blood. A low hum of approval rippled through the Republican side of the room. Bondi adjusted her papers with theatrical precision. Each motion, the straightening of the folder labeled confidential, the flick of her pen. The pause before she spoke again was measured to command attention. "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett," she continued, turning her gaze toward the Democratic benches, "has repeatedly spread false information regarding federal emergency relief funds. For months, her statements have caused confusion, outrage, and division among Americans who deserve better." A giant screen behind her flickered to life. A social media post appeared, Crockett's name highlighted, the words "systemic neglect of minority communities" glowing in blue. "This," Bondi said, gesturing toward the screen, "is the kind of reckless claim that fuels distrust and weakens our institutions. The truth, ladies and gentlemen, is very different." With a remote click, a new slide replaced the post, a FEMA map, covered in neat color-coded regions. Bondi's finger hovered above it like a teacher correcting a misbehaving student. These official documents show that disaster relief was distributed solely based on damage severity, not demographics. Representative Crockett's narrative is false, misleading, and deeply irresponsible. Gasps scattered across the room. Republican members leaned forward, exchanging satisfied nods. Across the aisle, Democrats stiffened. Some whispered to aides. Others stared at Crockett, searching for a reaction. She gave them none. Her face remained composed, her eyes fixed on Bondi. Bondi pressed on, sensing dominance. "And this isn't an isolated mistake," she said, her voice gaining force. "It's a pattern, a deliberate effort to distort facts for political gain. Let's look at her statements on police funding." Another slide. A quote projected in bold type. "Communities are being militarized, not protected." Bondi smiled faintly. "This is from a press conference just 4 months ago. Yet, Representative Crockett voted for the appropriations bill that directed 40% of law enforcement funding to community programs. So, which is it, Congresswoman? The facts or the fiction?" The chairman's gavel tapped once, half-heartedly, to quiet murmurs of agreement. Journalists typed furiously, cameras clicking in a staccato rhythm that filled the background like applause. Bondi's tone grew colder, heavier. "This isn't about partisan spin," she continued. "This is about accountability, about honesty, about whether those who claim to stand for justice actually believe in it when it's inconvenient." Behind her, the words, "accountability, integrity, truth," appeared on the screen in bold white letters. The performance was flawless, rehearsed, commanding. "Persuasive?" a Democratic member interjected. "Mr. Chairman, this line of testimony is outside the scope." Overruled. The chairman snapped before Bondi could respond. "The witness will continue." Bondi turned back toward the screen, eyes flashing with satisfaction. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." She flipped to the next page of her binder. "Now, let's talk about what Representative Crockett has really been hiding." The lights dimmed slightly as new documents filled the screen. Email headers, timestamps, subject lines with the words "internal communication." Bondi's voice dropped to a lower register, confident and deliberate. "These are internal congressional emails obtained through legal channels. They show that Congresswoman Crockett was aware of the actual FEMA data weeks before she made her public claims. She knew the truth and chose to mislead the public anyway." The room exploded in noise. Democrats demanded clarification. Republicans murmured phrases like "unbelievable" and "caught red-handed." The chairman's gavel pounded repeatedly for order. "Where did you get those?" a Democratic member shouted. "Those are internal." Bondi didn't flinch. "Through proper legal means," she replied, chin lifted. "The American people have a right to know the truth." Cameras zoomed in. Sweat glistened on Bondi's temple, but her smile remained fixed. She believed she had landed the knockout blow in the crowd. A journalist whispered to another, "This could end Crockett's career." Bondi leaned forward, savoring the attention. We can't allow misinformation to infect our institutions. This is bigger than one representative. This is about restoring trust in our democracy. Her words echoed through the hall, confident and rehearsed, the rhythm of someone accustomed to applause. The hearing room buzzed with electricity, half outrage, half awe. Crockett remained silent, watching with an expression so calm it almost felt defiant. Bondi mistook it for weakness. She stacked her papers neatly, then reached for another folder thicker, heavier, locked with another red confidential stamp. Her voice lowered, promising revelation. "But there's something else," she said, eyes narrowing toward Crockett. "Something the Congresswoman won't want you to see?" The audience shifted forward as Bondi drew a deep breath, savoring the anticipation she'd created. She thought she had the room in her grasp, thought she was in total control. But as Bondi prepared her next revelation, one quiet note slipped into Crockett's hand and everything began to change. Long before the cameras, before the lights in the marble halls, Jasmine Crockett had already learned what silence could do. She'd seen it in courtrooms where judges barely looked up from their papers, in neighborhoods where the hum of patrol cars replaced the sound of laughter in clients' eyes when they whispered, "No one's going to believe me." That was the silence she'd made her life's work to break. She hadn't come from privilege. She came from the South Dallas-born, raised by a schoolteacher mother who worked 2 jobs, and a father who taught her the meaning of standing tall when the world tried to make you small. Her first lessons in law weren't in lecture halls, but in kitchen table debates, where her parents drilled one truth into her: if you have a voice, use it. At the University of Houston, she was relentless. She volunteered at legal clinics after class, representing tenants facing eviction, mothers fighting custody battles, workers cheated out of wages. When classmates went home, she stayed late poring over case files, marking every margin with notes that began as legal logic and ended as moral conviction. When they underestimate you, she used to whisper to herself, "That's when you win." Years later, that whisper became her compass. Her first major case as a civil rights lawyer came after a teenager was arrested for filming a traffic stop. The prosecution expected her to fold. She was young, untested, and outspoken, but when she stood before the jury, her voice didn't waver. She walked them through the facts like a symphony, every note deliberate, every pause strategic. She didn't shout, didn't posture. She simply told the truth with a calm so steady it disarmed the room. The verdict, not guilty. The moment, transformative. That night, she drove home in silence. No celebration, no victory speech. Just the faint reflection of her headlights on the windshield and the weight of what she'd learned. Justice wasn't a performance. It was patience, preparation, and the courage to stay composed when others mistook restraint for weakness. Her rise through Texas politics wasn't the product of wealth or favors. It was grind and grit. She knocked on doors in 100-degree heat, spoke at church basements, listened before she led. When reporters asked why she ran for Congress, she said, "Because I got tired of defending people one case at a time. I want to change the system that keeps putting them there." Every win she earned came with a cost. Long nights, constant scrutiny, coded doubt reserved for women who didn't fit the mold. She never matched the manicured image Washington preferred. No family dynasty, no corporate sponsors. Just a civil rights lawyer with a southern drawl and an unshakable sense of purpose. And that's why, when Pam Bondi accused her of deceit, Crockett didn't flinch. She'd been accused before of being too emotional, to direct too much. But she knew better. Composure wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Back in the hearing room, Crockett's eyes never left Bondi as the former attorney general paraded her slides and charts. Every accusation felt like a rerun of battles she'd fought for years, different setting, same script. She recognized the rhythm, the polished indignation, the feigned concern for truth, the moral theater performed for the cameras. She'd seen it from prosecutors who lost on evidence but won on performance in her mind. Flashes of her journey played out like silent film reels. The night she stayed up, cross-examining transcripts until dawn, the rally where an elderly woman gripped her hand and said, "You're fighting for all of us, baby." The empty courtroom after a verdict where she sat alone, letting the weight of victory settle into quiet resolve. These weren't moments of fame, they were her foundation. Every trial, every fight, every insult that tried to break her had instead built armor. Not the kind you wear to intimidate, but the kind forged from endurance, empathy, and truth. She knew Bondi's type. She'd faced them in every courtroom, confident, rehearsed, convinced that authority was the same as righteousness. But authority without integrity was just noise. And noise, Crockett had learned, always burns itself out. Under the table, her hand brushed the folded note her aide had just slipped her. One glance, just a few words, and her lips curved in the faintest smile. To anyone watching, it looked like nothing. But for Crockett, it was everything. Bondi continued, unaware that the balance of power had already shifted. She spoke of integrity, of restoring public trust. her voice rising like a sermon. Crockett listened, serene, every cell in her body attuned to timing. Years of advocacy had taught her that winning wasn't about the loudest voice. It was about precision, patience, and the moment you choose to strike. As Bondi wrapped her opening salvo, Crockett straightened her blazer, the red fabric catching the overhead light like a signal. Around her, the chaos of cameras, whispers, and political theater blurred into background noise. In her mind, everything narrowed to one clear line: stay steady. Stay true. The truth doesn't shout, it endures. Because this wasn't just another hearing. This was every courtroom she'd ever stood in, every cause she'd ever defended, every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong. It wasn't just Bondi she was facing, it was the machine behind her, the one that had always mistaken poise for surrender, and Crockett had no intention of surrendering. So when Pam Bondi unveiled her so-called smoking gun, Crockett already knew exactly how to end this game. The tension in the hearing room felt like static before a storm thick. It's electric, impossible to ignore. Pam Bondi stood at the witness table, her posture rigid, her smile honed to razor perfection. She'd mastered this choreography long ago. The clipped breath before a headline, the practiced outrage, the righteous indignation that made cable hosts swoon. Every motion was deliberate, every word calibrated for spectacle. "Let me draw your attention to this," she said, gesturing toward the glowing screens behind her. With a dramatic flick, a FEMA map appeared, counties shaded in blues and reds, dotted with misleading numbers. "These are the actual allocations for hurricane recovery funds," she declared, her voice gaining force. Representative Crockett's claims that minority communities were denied aid are not only false, they're dangerous. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Republicans leaned forward, eyes glittering with anticipation. The chairman tried to keep his face neutral but failed, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Across the aisle, Democrats shifted uneasily, her aides whispering in frantic bursts. Bondi paced like a prosecutor before a jury, her heels clicking against the marble. "This kind of misinformation," she continued, "doesn't just divide us, it erodes public trust. It makes Americans question the very institutions that serve them." Cameras zoomed in, capturing her every gesture. On social feeds, the C-SPAN logo blinked beside captions. "Bondi exposes Crockett." In the background, journalists typed furiously, racing to frame the moment before it was over. But at the witness table, Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She sat still, one hand resting lightly on her notes, her expression unreadable. The red of her blazer stood in stark contrast to Bondi's navy precision, quiet defiance amid the noise. "And it doesn't end there," Bondi pressed on, flipping to the next slide. "Congresswoman Crockett accused this body of militarizing police budgets. Yet here, she brandished a printout, is the appropriations bill she herself voted for. 40% allocated to community programs. The truth is written in black and white." A Republican congressman interjected, his voice dripping with mock disbelief. "So she says one thing back home and another here in Washington?" "Exactly," Bondi shot back, triumphant. "It's a pattern, intentional, manipulative, and deeply troubling." The chairman's gavel came down hard as Democrats erupted in protest. "The witness will continue," he ordered, though his tone carried more pride than neutrality. Bondi straightened, basking in the attention. To her, this was the moment, the kill shot that would define her comeback and end Crockett's credibility in one televised sweep. She reached for her final piece of evidence, a folder stamped confidential. The cameras clicked like gunfire as she opened it. "What Congresswoman Crockett doesn't want the public to see," she began, lowering her voice, "are these internal communications emails proving she knew the real data before making her statements. She chose to mislead. She chose deception." Gasps again. The sound of shuffling papers, murmurs, shifting chairs. The air itself seemed to vibrate with disbelief. Then a sharp voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Chairman," it was a senior Democrat, her tone slicing through the noise. "Before this continues, how did Ms. Bondi obtain what she claims are internal congressional emails? That's a serious security breach." The question hung in the air. Cameras swiveled toward Bondi. Her confident smile faltered for the first time. "These documents were provided to me through proper legal means," she said quickly, her words catching slightly. "They're authentic." But the murmurs didn't stop. A reporter in the back whispered, "How'd she get congressional servers?" Another typed, "Ethics violation." The chairman tried to regain control, pounding his gavel again. "Order." "The committee will," before he could finish. Young aide burst through the chamber doors, hurrying toward a Democratic member. He handed over a folded note, whispering something urgently. The congressman's eyes widened as he read, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "Mr. Chairman," he said, standing abruptly, "we've just received confirmation that portions of Ms. Bondi's evidence have been altered." The originals. He paused, letting the weight of it sink in, do not match what's being shown here. The words detonated like a bomb. Shouts erupted from both sides. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The chairman's gavel pounded helplessly against the desk. Bondi froze mid-sentence, color draining from her face. "That's impossible," she stammered, glancing at her aides, but their panicked whispers betrayed her. The once slick presentation now felt like unraveling fabric, each thread pulling loose faster than she could grasp it. Cameras captured everything. The confusion, the shock, the dawning realization that her proof might not survive scrutiny. The chairman finally raised his voice above the chaos. "The committee will take a 15-minute recess," he barked, trying to mask his unease. Bondi stepped away from the microphone, her hand trembling as she gathered her papers. Across the room, Crockett watched in silence, the faintest trace of understanding in her eyes. She didn't gloat. She didn't even smirk. She simply straightened her notes, calm as stone. The photographers swarmed as aides rushed toward their principals. The once assured Bondi now moved with frantic precision, whispering urgently, her poise collapsing under the weight of exposure. And somewhere between the shutter clicks and the stunned silence, everyone realized the power dynamic had shifted. The accuser was now the accused. When the hearing reconvened, Bondi expected redemption instead. She walked into her own unraveling. The gavel struck twice. Order returned only in form, not in spirit. Every reporter's lens locked on Jasmine Crockett. The room, still vibrating from the chaos, seemed to lean toward her. She adjusted her mic, smoothed the sleeve of her red blazer, and spoke with a calmness that cut through the static like steel through silk. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, her tone even deliberate. "And thank you, Ms. Bondi, for your imaginative presentation. It's not every day we get to watch fiction constructed so thoroughly in real time." A ripple of laughter broke across the Democratic benches, soft but electric. Bondi flinched. Crockett continued, the corners of her mouth barely lifting in a controlled half-smile. "Now, rather than chase down every exaggerated claim, I'll focus on the foundation of Ms. Bondi's entire testimony. Because when the base collapses, the rest of the house falls on its own." She reached for a folder, the kind every good trial lawyer carries when they know the ending before the story begins. The large screens around the room flickered to life again, this time under her control. "What you're seeing," Crockett said, "is an email chain verified by independent cybersecurity experts. This was sent 3 weeks ago from Clark Davidson, political director for the Americans for Prosperity Foundation." Bondi's eyes darted toward her aides. Crockett's voice never wavered. "Allow me to read the highlighted section aloud." She adjusted her glasses, leaned toward the mic, and delivered the words slowly, each syllable deliberate. Echoing through the stunned chamber, "Operation Credibility Kill must launch before the midterms. Crockett's visibility makes her the ideal target. Bondi will deliver the package at the emergency funding hearing. All materials will be supplied." The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that happens when truth finally lands after being suffocated for too long. Then chaos. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing in a strobe of disbelief. Gasps, shouts, crosstalk. Even some Republicans blinked in stunned confusion. The chairman pounded his gavel until his arm trembled. "Order, order in this room." Crockett waited. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. When quiet finally settled again, she spoke with measured precision. "I have here the complete thread, authenticated, time-stamped, and verified by forensic metadata. This isn't speculation. It's proof." She advanced the slide. Side-by-side images appeared. Bondi's version of the FEMA map on one side, the original on the other. Red highlights glared across the screen like open wounds. "Let's start simple," Crockett said, her tone almost professorial. "This is the FEMA distribution map Ms. Bondi displayed. But if you look here," she pointed to the corner of the screen, "you'll notice that the disaster severity index key has been removed. In other words, it was altered to make aid appear politically biased when it was actually based on storm damage assessments."
Ow.
A murmur rolled through the room. "Now here," she continued, flipping to the next slide, "the internal emails Ms. Bondi claimed were proof of my misconduct. Her version deletes one crucial line, the one where I explicitly asked for full data transparency before making public statements." Bondi's breathing grew audible, shallow, her knuckles white on the table edge. Crockett turned, facing her directly for the first time. "Ms. Bondi, as a former attorney general, you should understand what tampering with evidence looks like, and so should anyone watching at home." A hush. No one moved. The cameras zoomed in on Bondi's pale expression. Crockett continued, now with the steady rhythm of a litigator closing in on the truth. "But this goes beyond embarrassment. This is coordination. Political manipulation masquerading as oversight." The next slide appeared. Phone logs, calendar entries, meeting notes. "These are your meetings, Ms. Bondi," Crockett said evenly. With energy industry executives just days before this hearing, the same corporations that stand to profit if this emergency funding bill fails, the crowd erupted. Gasps turned to exclamations. Reporters shouted questions over each other. Order. The chairman shouted, his gavel cracking like thunder, but it was too late. The image of Bondi sitting stone still while her meetings scrolled across national television was already burned into the moment history in motion. Crockett turned back to the microphone. Her voice, calm and resonant, carried above the noise. I move that this committee refer Ms. Bondi's testimony to the House Ethics Committee for immediate review to investigate possible fabrication of evidence and violations of truthfulness before Congress. The words landed with surgical precision. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then, a voice from the Republican side, quiet, reluctant, but undeniable. Mr. Chairman, said a veteran lawmaker, I believe the Congresswoman's motion deserves consideration. A bipartisan ripple of shock coursed through the room. Bondi finally spoke, her voice thin and trembling. These accusations are false. That emailed those documents, they're fabricated. Crockett didn't even glance at her. The authentication certificates are included in my submission, she replied, her tone clipped, unwavering. And unlike your slides, Ms. Bondi, mine withstand forensic scrutiny. She lifted a thick binder, dense, tabbed, color-coded, every source, every citation, every chain of custody. We prepared this weeks ago because we knew an attack was coming. We didn't stop it. We let it play out to show the American people exactly how disinformation operates. The cameras clicked. Bondi's face froze mid-denial. Crockett's composure made the contrast unbearable. This isn't about me, Crockett continued, her voice softening but gaining weight. It's about every public servant targeted by deceit, every voter manipulated by lies, and every disaster victim whose relief was delayed because politics mattered more than people. Ash. Her words hung in the air, heavy and righteous. Even her opponents couldn't look away. Integrity, she said, isn't about who talks the loudest. It's about who stands tallest when the lies collapse. Bondi's hands trembled as she reached for her notes, searching for an exit that no longer existed. Crockett closed her binder gently, almost mercifully. We cannot let our committees become stages for manufactured scandal. If we do, the foundation of our democracy rots from within. Silence, then applause. Soft at first, from the Democratic side, then growing until the chamber itself seemed to exhale. Even some journalists put their pens down, watching in awe. The chairman, his voice strained, attempted to restore control. The committee will take the Congresswoman's motion under advisement, he said, though his tone had lost its authority. Crockett nodded once. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. She turned to gather her papers, the red of her blazer catching the studio lights like fire. Behind her, Bondi sat frozen, the image of a once fearless prosecutor now facing her own. Cross-dash examination. The camera lights dimmed as aides whispered frantically. Reporters filed out, racing to transmit the moment that would dominate every feed in America. And in that brief, suspended silence before the next storm of headlines, one truth was already undeniable. Bondi's attack had detonated in her own hands. It began within minutes of the hearing's adjournment. The hallway outside the committee room pulsed with noise, reporters shouting questions. Camera flashes slicing through the air like lightning. Staffers swarmed, phones pressed to their ears, voices trembling with disbelief. And then, across every social platform, a single phrase detonated into virality. #CrockettTakedown. Clips flooded Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube before Bondi had even left the building. The 30-second sequence, Crockett reading the Operation Credibility Kill email aloud. Bondi's face, draining of color, became instant political canon. News alerts stacked one over another. Bondi evidence under ethics probe. Congresswoman Crockett exposes coordinated smear. Former Florida ag faces. Backlash after altered document claims. Cable networks scrambled to rewrite their chirons. Mid-broadcast. On MSNBC, the anchor leaned forward, eyes wide. This is one of the most extraordinary reversals I've ever seen in a congressional hearing, she said. On CNN, a former prosecutor marveled. Crockett dismantled her opponent with the precision of a courtroom surgeon. Even conservative commentators, once quick to defend Bondi, hesitated on air, grasping for neutral language. We need to verify these allegations, one murmured. But if that email's real, this could be a serious ethics matter. Inside the Capitol, Bondi's exit was quiet, almost ghost-like. While reporters crowded near the main staircase, she slipped through a side corridor, escorted by aides. Her once immaculate composure had collapsed into hurried whispers in a bowed head. Cameras caught only the back of her navy jacket disappearing into a service elevator, a faint reflection of defeat. Across the rotunda, Jasmine Crockett emerged into the chaos. The red of her blazer glowed under the fluorescent lights like a signal flare. Microphones surged toward her. Congresswoman, did you anticipate this attack? someone shouted. Crockett stopped, looked directly into the lenses, and spoke with calm authority. We were aware that coordinated efforts were underway to discredit several Democratic representatives before the midterms, she said. We chose to let it play out, and today the truth revealed itself. Her tone wasn't vindictive, it was resolute, almost protective. This was never about revenge, she continued. It's about protecting the integrity of congressional proceedings and ensuring that public trust is not manipulated by those who think politics should be a game. The moment aired live across every network. Viewers watched as Crockett, once the target, now stood as the voice of order amid political chaos. Her composure, her precision, her quiet strength turned her from participant to symbol. She didn't gloat. She didn't spike the football. She simply told the truth, and that restraint made it thunder louder than any headline. Within hours, national talk shows began rewriting the narrative. Crockett didn't just win, said one liberal commentator. She exposed the entire machinery of disinformation, and she did it with dignity. By evening, the video had surpassed 5 million views on YouTube. A meme circulated showing Bondi holding her folder labeled confidential beside Crockett's slide labeled verified. The caption read, "Receipts always win." Hashtags evolved into movements. Hashtag Stand With Crockett began trending alongside hashtag Integrity Over Spin. Progressive influencers reposted the clip with messages of admiration. Civil rights groups issued statements praising her composure under fire. Even neutral journalists described the moment as a modern political reckoning. Live streamed. Bondi, meanwhile, faced an avalanche of scrutiny. The ethics committee confirmed it was reviewing her testimony. Fox News canceled her scheduled appearance, citing ongoing developments. Her PR team released a short statement. Ms. Bondi stands by her testimony and will cooperate fully with investigators. But the words felt hollow too late. To rehearsed in contrast, Crockett's star ascended like a sunrise. Cable panels debated whether she was the next breakout Democratic voice. Editorial boards called her handling of the crisis a masterclass in factual combat. On one late-night show, the host quipped, "You can't spell credibility without Crockett." The audience roared behind the viral headlines. The effects rippled deeper. Inside both parties, strategists whispered about what had just happened. A smear designed to destroy a rising congresswoman had instead exposed the machinery behind political manipulation. Live in front of millions. It's not just that she defended herself, a senior Democratic aide said. She flipped the script on how misinformation works and turned the camera around. The next morning's papers captured it all. The Crockett effect. Bondi backfire stuns Washington. Truth goes viral. And as dawn broke over the Capitol dome, one image circulated more than any other. Jasmine Crockett walking down the marble hallway, chin lifted. Cameras flashing behind her, the calm center of a storm she'd just silenced. But the story didn't end in that chamber. What came next would rewrite political strategy across America in the days that followed. The frenzy around Jasmine Crockett could have easily consumed her. The cameras followed her through corridors. Invitations poured in from every Sunday show, and her social feeds overflowed with praise. But instead of basking in the spotlight, she pivoted. Calmly, deliberately, she turned the spectacle into substance. On the first morning after the hearing, returned to her office before sunrise. Stacks of briefing papers covered her desk. FEMA allocations, emergency relief amendments, proposed oversight measures. To her staff, she said simply, "We're going to make sure the noise becomes something real." That same afternoon, Crockett reintroduced the emergency funding bill she'd been fighting for all along. The very legislation Bondi had tried to discredit this time. The nation was watching. Cameras followed her as she walked into the committee room again, the same room where she'd dismantled the smear just days before. Her presence carried new gravity. Even her critics listened differently now. The red blazer returned, symbolic but unspoken, a reminder of quiet strength. Republican members who'd once avoided eye contact now leaned forward during her remarks. She didn't gloat, didn't reference the hearing. Instead, she spoke with focus and clarity. "Disaster relief shouldn't be a partisan trophy," she said evenly. "It's a moral responsibility. When people's homes are underwater, they don't care what letter comes after your name." The hearing ended not in fireworks, but in something rarer: agreement. A bipartisan subcommittee advanced the bill. A conservative from Florida, once among Bondi's supporters, nodded across the aisle. She came prepared, he admitted quietly to reporters. Facts, not fury. News anchors called it the pivot that stunned Washington. Commentators who'd covered the original confrontation now marveled at her restraint. She could have ridden the outrage cycle, one political analyst said on air. Instead, she turned a viral moment into legislative momentum. That's the difference between a headline and a legacy. Editorials praised her strategy. Jasmine Crockett has redefined political resilience. read one. Her calm in the storm showed that dignity can be as disarming as aggression and far more enduring, another noted. In an age of weaponized spectacle, Crockett proved that preparation is the quiet form of power. But for Crockett, it wasn't about vindication. In a brief hallway interview after the bill's passage, she addressed the reporters crowding around her. "I appreciate the attention," she said, with a half smile. "But families in disaster zones don't need viral clips. They need results." Her words echoed across networks, replayed in highlight reels and editorials. Viewers heard not just a political statement, but a moral one. A reminder that truth, when paired with purpose, doesn't just survive chaos. It rebuilds from it. By week's end, the emergency funding bill cleared the House with a surprising bipartisan majority. Relief packages were expanded, oversight strengthened, and transparency clauses added to prevent the very kind of manipulation that Bondi's operation had attempted. It was a full-circle victory, not just for Crockett, but for anyone who'd watched truth bend under pressure and wondered if it could ever stand again as pundits dissected her rise. They used words usually reserved for fiction: comeback, redemption, integrity under fire. Yet what resonated most wasn't spectacle. It was her silence between the noise, her refusal to perform outrage, her insistence on action over applause. Late one night, as Congress adjourned, a photographer caught her leaving the Capitol steps, papers tucked under her arm, city lights reflecting against the marble. She wasn't smiling. She didn't need to. Her walk carried the quiet assurance of someone who had already won something larger than an argument, the public's belief that truth could still triumph. And yet, even as the bill passed, investigators were uncovering just how deep the operation had gone. 1 year later, the headlines told a story that many had suspected but few imagined could be proven. Operation Credibility Kill exposed. The reports were staggering. Coordinated data manipulation, leaks timed to smear reformist lawmakers, private sector money funneled into misinformation campaigns. And at the center of it all, the very network Pam Bondi had quietly defended. Now under federal scrutiny for Jasmine Crockett. It wasn't vindication she celebrated, but validation, proof that truth, though buried and bruised, still finds its way to daylight. When the final report dropped, she didn't hold a press conference or claim victory. She stood before her community in Dallas, beneath a mural painted after her viral moment, and said simply, "The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand." Her words rippled far beyond that crowd. Commentators called her the conscience of a divided Congress. Students wrote her name in debate speeches. Even critics admitted she'd become the rarest thing in politics, symbol of moral clarity. As the nation reflected on that year, one lesson rang out: power may twist narratives, but integrity endures longer than outrage. Crockett's story wasn't just about one confrontation. It was about the responsibility of every citizen who refuses to be fooled by noise, because truth doesn't defend itself, people do. So if you believe in standing with those who fight for honesty, if you believe in facts over fury, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't just watch. Be part of it. Subscribe, stay informed, and stand with the truth seekers. Because in an age built on spin, your voice is the last line of defense for what's real.